Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast, and today I'm joined by Nell Meosky Luo. She is the CEO and co-founder of Folia Health. Folia are a health tracking platform that is really reshaping how chronic and rare conditions are understood by, well, quite cleverly, they're turning the everyday patient experience into structured, actionable data. And that's the key here. It's the actionable data part. They are a really interesting business. They recently announced a Series A. They've been around for about 9 or so years. Nell's got a fantastic background herself and obviously a very kind of resonating kind of mission-led founding story here as well. So yeah, great to have you on today, Nell. And as I mentioned kind of off camera, it's a company I've come across previously, but for those that haven't heard of Folia and tying this into kind of the founding story, what was the background to the business and when was that kind of light bulb moment that you not only had a good idea, but you had a business?
Sure. Well, thanks, Alex. It's exciting to be on here with you. So, honestly, this is not a light bulb moment type of story. This is something where I was pretty obsessed with the problem that we're trying to solve for years before starting Folia.
Interesting.
And it's going to make me sound extremely nerdy, and that would be accurate. But I was actually interested in this problem in high school, and so
Okay.
it took a while to have any amount of kind of knowledge and experience to put towards solving it. But I have a younger brother who has a rare immune deficiency, which is called CVID, or common variable immune deficiency. And it means that he has trouble fighting off infections on his own. And it's interesting, when the immune system is a bit dysregulated or a little topsy-turvy, you end up in a situation where you can actually also have autoimmune. So you can have your immune system overreacting to some things and underreacting to other things. And that's been my brother's experience since we were small. So this is the early 90s when Paul was first diagnosed. He got very lucky that his diagnosis process was only, a couple of years. For many people being diagnosed with these types of diseases, it's much longer than that. But it was an incredibly stressful experience for my parents. And then coming out of that with the diagnosis, it didn't get much easier, right? It still required and continues to require seeing multiple specialists. We traveled. I grew up in Buffalo. We would travel all over the Northeast and even as far as St. Louis to see, different specialists to get different opinions on the right way to approach his care. And it always felt very experiential, right? Ultimately, it's driven by who that particular specialist has seen and what worked for them. There is obviously research, but that research itself is really driven only by the clinical experience and what comes into the clinic and how the doctors interpret and use that information. What ends up happening when you're, I was a kid who is very science oriented, and I was learning about the experimental method.
Mm.
You feel that it's not really science, right? It's like you're sitting in these appointments and it seems like it's maybe guess and check. And in many cases, it's not even guess and check. It's like guess and then guess again at a different place, right? And so in order to get to a more kind of data-driven scientific process, to be able to quickly, much more efficiently, quickly, easily, and accurately identify what's going on with someone and what's working, what's not working, and iterate quickly to get to the right solution, you need better inputs, is what I eventually realized, right? Obviously, these clinicians were doing their best with what they had. They have limited time. They're working within the constraints of the current system. And they're, brilliant people. But what they actually need is more data, right? More information on that person sitting in front of them instead
Mm.
of that quick history that is whatever you remember to tell them in that 10 minutes
Yeah.
with your kid sitting next to you, in some cases, whatever. Instead of that, having an actually accurate longitudinal view collected at the time that you were experiencing something, a symptom or a flare or, a problem with a medication or a medication, starting to work really well. That information, if you can capture it in a structured and, as you said, actionable format, is incredibly valuable. And so then the question is, how can you do that, right? How can you collect that information so that when you come to the appointment, you have a log of everything important that's happened that the clinician can react to as data to be able to make an informed and more accurate, more personalized understanding of what it is that is going on with you and what's most likely to work right now. So that's
Right.
the concept behind Folia. And honestly, it was years and years of thinking about this problem, trying to figure out the right solution, and then eventually having saved enough money from a couple of years of consulting. I thought I was going to go to grad school to work on this problem, and then an advisor told me that sounded like a company, and I was, 24 and Didn't know how hard that would be. So I said, cool, I'll start a company. So that would be, I guess, the light bulb moment with someone telling me that what I was talking about, trying to collect this information at scale, what sounded like a company instead of a grad school experience. But
I love that. And I love the fact that it was kind of such early on, isn't it? You said back to kind of school time or the high school, you're kind of obsessed by this. Was that because necessarily, obviously, with your brother, it was just, or were you naturally that way, inclined, quite scientific, quite research led from a mindset standpoint?
yeah, it just didn't make sense. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's what I got caught up on, right? Is there are so many things that are difficult for kind of real world logistical reasons. Like, I
Mm,
did some when I was in college on pediatric obesity care, and that's so hard, right? That is honestly, I burned out of that because there are so many complex societal issues associated with, trying to solve that set of problems.
mm,
This is actually different. This is a simpler problem. I think that's why I was so kind of caught by it, because it's a solvable, high impact problem where you actually can, by collecting this type of information and simply getting it in front of the people who are dealing with the condition
mm.
themselves and the clinicians, you can make things work a lot better. You don't have to solve 50, societal logistical issues to really make a difference, which is why I think I got really obsessed with it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'd agree. I'd say some of the best ideas or the best companies out there have come off the back of the most simple idea that people just have failed to kind of not so much solve, but tackle. And it's almost that, eureka moment. You think, oh, I wish I had that idea because that makes sense. So talk to me about that evolution of that journey with the taking an idea. You had that kind of mentor advisor that said, this sounds like a company. And I talked about that kind of journey because I know that certainly I don't want to use the two-letter word too much, but in the world of AI, there's a lot of kind of patient tracking tools, there's new reported outcome tools, there's different reiterations of similar products launching quite regularly. So talk to me about when you achieved that product market for, or at least you understood that there was a need for your solution, then you could obviously then start to monetize it.
Yeah. So I think you noted this a little bit in what you just said, but this is the type of problem that a lot of people recognize needs solving. And it's also something where you're right. When people hear about this, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't often get like, I wish I'd started that, but because it's a health tech company and no one ever wishes that they started a health tech company. But
Nothing
um,
mad.
yeah, exactly. But sometimes I daydream about consumer products. I'm like, can you imagine how, just
No.
but but I do get a lot like, "Oh, does that not exist already?" Because there's almost this feeling that it should, right? It's like, so certainly there are lots of people thinking about this idea. I think that it's so interesting to me that the continuous unlock year over year has been the same.
Mm,
So our differentiator hasn't changed that much. And even over this whole span of time, over COVID and everything that did to make, honestly, we've had a lot of walls that have crumbled down over the past 9 years, which is great. Like when we first started, home reported data was actually kind of a crazy idea. Like back in
okay.
2017, no one even thought that was really possible or even necessarily usable. Obviously, the pandemic changed that a lot. So there are all sorts of kind of barriers that have come down, which has been great. And I like to
Mm,
think we've been a part of it too with the data that we've collected and the research that we've done. But the fundamental difference between our approach at Folia and everything else that we've ever seen and what we've heard from our users is that we primarily focus on what that individual user, that person who's living with a chronic disease or going through a diagnostic odyssey or is a family member caring for someone, what they are looking to solve and how we can be an indispensable tool for them. And then the research and analytics use of the data is kind of the exhaust from that problem solving. But the kind of shared DNA that we have, because there are some like consumer oriented health tools that are really not research oriented. The shared DNA that our company has is with a research focus, because that's really my background, right? I would love to say that I'm a consumer person. I'm really not. As I mentioned, I'm way too nerdy for that. We have some people who are less on the team, but I'm really much more of a research than I'm a researcher. My team, half of us are researchers and biostatisticians. And so our orientation is to make sure that all data that we're ever collecting is structured, repeatable. It's something that we can validate against other data sets. We can understand what it means. And then we keep it extremely consistent and we keep our analyses and our methods extremely consistent so that we can replicate our research over time and show the value of this and what it means.
mm,
A way of thinking about health data that is shared by research-oriented companies that don't think about the user very much, so they can't really collect data at scale. And it's really kind of foreign to the more consumer-oriented companies who, might be really great at developing interfaces that are engaging, but are not collecting the data in a format and with the repeatability and structure that we are to make it usable for research. So
Yeah.
it's kind of that meeting point between those two worlds is what makes us different. And I think what's really fascinating about it is that I actually think it makes us more valuable to the users themselves, because there are a couple areas where that kind of shared DNA between the research side and the individual patient side has caused us to make decisions that actually make a lot more sense for the individual user. So, for instance, we are completely condition agnostic.
Okay.
Why?
Interesting.
Because people don't exist in condition silos. And honestly, from a theoretical perspective, it doesn't really make that much sense to put people in condition silos, because ultimately the physiology of each person is quite complex. People unfortunately do get misdiagnosed, or they may have multiple conditions going on at once. They also may want to track for multiple people. So having apps that are condition specific and also having you track on the basis of what you think the condition is, first of all, is more difficult for the user because they don't have the full flexibility of what they need to track for everything. And secondly, actually is not as good from a science perspective, because you're biasing your results toward what you think that the answer is, what you think that person has, as opposed
Yeah.
to keeping it much more broad and oriented toward how are you doing? Right? How is your physiology doing? How's your body doing? How is your mood and behavior doing? And what are the treatments that you're using? And then cutting the analysis by conditions when we're trying to learn specific things.
That is really interesting, because it also begs the question that some conditions could lead to other conditions. And if you're just focusing on one pocket of, well, this is your issue, but actually, we're not thinking holistically about the person here. We're
Right. You
focusing
suddenly
on one
become,
area.
yes. And then the app becomes much less valuable and useful to that person as soon as
Yeah.
there's something that's going on.
Interesting. So obviously talking around the data piece, obviously I'm a data nerd, I recruit into data and AI, and it is super important. But I know you previously said obviously AI is only really as good as the data. And if we look at kind of health data and kind of real world data, how does Folia work with that in mind? And what I mean by that is you've got all these different data points, you've got all these different patient points, you've got global data, you've got research data. How does Folio kind of bring that all together so everyone benefits?
Yeah. It's relatively simple. I mean, simple is kind of the name of the game for us, like making things make sense. So, excuse me, fundamentally, you as a user on Folia own your entire data set all the time, right?
Okay.
So whether you're currently in a research study or not currently in a research study, whether you're in our Mosaic program, which is our long-term registry-like program that we launched this year that
Yep.
allows you to be part of a, call it like low effort long-term research study to just keep giving your data to understanding of your condition. It doesn't change your experience on the app at all. You may have some additional questions based on the research that you're in, but besides that, it's the exact same app. There's no skin or change there. And the data access that you have is always complete, right? So you as an individual user own all of your Folia data. You can see it all at any time. You can use it for whatever you want to at any time, which means that you have a single source of truth. And you don't have this kind of like bumpiness, like, oh, I'm in a research study, so I'm tracking this data, and then it's going to go into some black hole, right, that I'm never going to see again, which we've had our experience, my family's experienced this. Maybe the most extreme version of it I've experienced is that we went to the NIH in Bethesda about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and they actually took like skin punches. I have a little scar on my arm to be able to do genome and exome sequencing. This was, back when this was necessary because it was earlier days. And we never heard back what happened. We never got the data on that, right? Right. That's honestly more often than not how research happens. And so like one of the biggest, changes between that type of environment and how Folia works is that you always have full control and being able to see your Folia data. And then we actually share back both interim and final results of all of our studies that you're part of, so that we call these participant reports. And you receive participant reports about what we're learning. So you not only are always able to access your own data, but you actually can access learnings from the research that you're part of.
Yeah, I think it's really super important. It's nice you address that, because ultimately it's their data, isn't it? And they want to know what that's led to, what that means. And I think in the world of kind of data and AI and automation, there's no excuses for them not to know or have an update on what's happening. And I know we're going to touch on Mosaic in a bit, because I know the research I did on it, and actually from you touching on it there, that's almost like a secondary layer of what kind of Folia offers as well. It's actually helping kind of the broader research piece. But I'm keen to touch on growing, and obviously, congrats, obviously, recently on the Series A. I guess you had this kind of 8-9 year journey. You said yourself, you're not on the commercial side. You're a researcher. You're passionate, about what you do. But how are you going to tackle the growth piece? And what I mean by that is hiring. All the fun stuff that comes with that.
Yeah.
Where are you on that journey, and how are you going to approach that? Because I think people listening here, raising funds or capital is one thing, but a lot of companies make such poor decisions when they have that capital. So I'm interested to touch on, what does that journey look like?
So this is our second time with a significant funding round. So we did a seed so we did a couple angel rounds, back when we were getting started. We were very lean for quite a while. We got kind of all the way through to product market fit with a few angel rounds and like 6 people on the team. But then we did a seed round in October of 2021. It closed 10 days after my first child was born. So that was
Congrats.
it was nuts. And I remember going into labor and being, and like I was sending an email to the lawyers being like, I'm gonna need, like, give me 36 hours. Yeah, so that was our first experience. So that was the $6 million round that we raised with Crosslink, and then Crosslink actually came back in and helped us out and did a bridge round in between the seed and the Series A as we were working on the go to market. So from that seed round, I think we made a lot of the mistakes, right? I think that we learned a lot about spending toward a concept versus spending in reaction to needs.
Interesting.
So I think we did a lot of, conceptual building of the company and the team
Okay.
that in some ways was necessary, because there were areas where we really needed more firepower, specifically like engineering and product, for instance. We needed it to be more than the 3 people who were working on that. And those hires really helped us get over a hill. But I think we
Mhm.
also probably overinvested in some areas where we weren't quite ready for additional teammates, and
Okay.
maybe should have like kept ourselves a bit more focused on feeling so confident. The way that I think about it now that we're hiring again and growing the team again, do you know like exactly what you think the answer is for like a 0 to 1 part of the company, right? So if you feel like from 0 to 1, you know what the answer is, and now the question is, how do you get from 1 to 10?
Yeah.
That's a good time to hire. But if you're still in that 0 to 1 and you're hiring people to try to help you figure that out, that's
Yeah,
not
that's wrong.
that's not the
Yeah.
right move, right? So that's one of the ways that we think about it. And so now, we are going from 1 to 10 on a number of different functions. We're actually going from kind of 100 on more the product and engineering side. We're a bit more advanced on that side of the org. And what's interesting is then you start thinking about things that we've really never thought about before, like how to make sure that, as you grow and you get to a size where you individually as founders can't have a direct relationship with each person all the time and be like very
Mm.
aware
Of
of what
course.
everyone's doing. How do you like institute practices and also sometimes managerial levels while not creating too much process or slowing yourselves down or distancing people from us and what we're trying to accomplish and kind of first principles all the time. So that's
Mhm.
that's the hard part for me is just thinking through like what's the smallest, it's almost like an MVP for the team. Like what's the smallest possible team and smallest number of processes and managers and that type of structure that we can get away with to be successful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I suppose half the fun, right? It's going on that journey and learning by doing and learning by your mistakes. I think this is the first time that big sizable kind of Series A. You're like, you got to deploy that capital effectively. But on your point you just raised, it's like you can't be founder, manager, innovator, everything. You have to
You
eventually
can try.
relinquish some control. Yeah. You may blow into like a ball of flames trying, but I think, yeah, it's about relinquishing control and also hiring fantastic first hires. I think if you get those first hires right, then it really does help you and free you up to kind of move up and do what you enjoy.
Yes, definitely. And I think that you make a great point that the fit and the quality of the hires makes such a difference. And I think this
100%.
time we are being so extremely deliberate
Mm,
about that because it's not just whether the person themselves is fantastic. We have the luxury of speaking with lots of fantastic people all the time. I think people get really excited about our mission, and so we end up really, fantastic pool of candidates. And then you have to think about the fit for exactly what we need them to do and exactly the stage of the company. And I
mm,
think that's the biggest learning that I've had over time, which is just because someone is fantastic and totally gets what you're doing and would be an awesome person to work with and has the skills, all of those things don't necessarily mean that they're exactly the right fit for this stage, for the job you need them to do. And I think like being very stubborn and honestly patient and waiting with, there are all these maxims, right? About like, it's much more expensive and much more difficult to have to part ways with someone down the line rather than waiting a little bit longer to hire the right
couldn't agree
person.
more.
It's hard to do though
Yeah.
in the moment because you're like, I'm hiring because we're underwater. We need more help. But having that discipline, I think, is really important. And one of the things that we've been doing is requiring that the other founders, so everybody kind of falls under, one side of the org, they're either under me or they're under Dan. We require that the other founder is like the last interview and speaks with every new hire to just make sure that
Mm,
kind of other side of the org didn't get carried away on like wanting to, just bring someone in
honed
and
in
get
on
this
one
done.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a check, right? Just to make sure that everybody agrees that this is like a clear fit.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think my day job's hiring, and I think I always say that the founders should be either very early on or very late on, and kind of sanity check. They set the scene, but then they close the scene. They go, okay, great, we're all on board. Because you're right, one person in your org may have a problem, and this person could solve their problem for them. And actually, what you need is them to solve a whole plethora of problems. So no, I completely get that. Exciting. Well, good luck with that. I think it's going to be an exciting journey. I know you briefly touched on Mosaic, but I want to kind of close things off by talking about that because the research piece is obviously huge, and your product Mosaics are basically giving the patient control, right? So they've got control of their data. With regards to AI and advanced analytics and predictive modeling, where do you see this going?
Yeah. We are fundamentally a data layer, right? And I think that the one of the things that I would like to impress upon everyone who listens to this is in any AI use case, we all know that it's, crap in, crap out, right? Like you have to have the right underlying data for the ultimate conclusions to make any sense. In healthcare, that is particularly important. And it's actually surprisingly hard, right? In so many other areas, we actually have better foundational data layers that people are already using. We do not have great foundational data layers in healthcare. It's one of the reasons why Watson Health, you know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, did not work because the data that we are training on
Mm,
is fundamentally very flawed, right? Think about like what's in an EHR data set. EHR, these electronic health records that are collected at the hospital system, they are built as billing systems, right? That is the primary function of an EHR system is to allow a clinician to bill. Is health data that's collected in that, but it's almost incidental and it's not everything that someone needs. Really the only like high quality, really helpful stuff in there is doctor's notes, which are very helpful and have to be abstracted. And there are lots of companies working on that. Claims data is worse. It's just the exhaust from the billing system. And unfortunately, a huge percentage, it's something like 20% of claims are fraudulent or inaccurate, right? So then 20% of that data is like really not good data at all.
yeah.
So when you think about like what do you need to actually be able to make good decisions and good recommendations to people using an AI algorithm on existing health data, you need much higher quality and individual level data because it also has to be about you. So one of the really cool things about our home reported outcomes data collection method is that it's a lot of observations. So it's a deep, not wide data set. So it's a lot of
Okay.
observations per individual participant over time. That is a little bit different from some of the existing methods of data collection, but it allows you to start thinking about like N of one analysis and N of one meta-analysis. So combining, multiple N of one analyses into understanding trends. And the power of that is that you can be extremely personalized, right? And thinking very critically about how is this particular person changing versus themselves over time? It's also called within patient change analysis. That's what
Yeah.
we're really excited about. There's also a bunch of population level analyses that make a ton of sense and are really exciting for us. But first, you have to collect really high quality data. So people who are in our Mosaic collect the information on all of their symptoms they're experiencing, flares, acute events at home, use of treatments, use of other things like new exercise regimens or new diets. They collect all this information in Folia, and then what they get through the Mosaic program is the ability to ask questions of the data set of the other people who are in Mosaic. And so it allows them to actually, it's patient-owned research, right? It's saying, I want to be part of a data collective that allows me to, ask the set of individuals who are tracking things like what I'm tracking, what they're doing, and to have, it's not like a forum where people respond. It's, a combined data set that's then queried. And that, as you can imagine, over time, as we pull in additional outside data sets, we have tokenized data that we can bring in these other data sets that exist, like the 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐢𝐻𝑟 and claims data, as well as the better doctor's notes abstraction that is being worked on. You can start to get really high fidelity responses on what might be happening and what the answer is to someone's health question.
Yeah, I think what's so smart about your product and the way you talk through it is just, it's all still with that patient front and center, isn't it? That everything's about them. It's about their experience. It's about diagnosing, treatment. It's obviously helping clinicians because ultimately they're going to have better data to work with, but ultimately it's for the patient. And then being part of those research studies is obviously going to potentially help them, but also help others as well. So I think it's really smart. It's no surprise you had the successes you have. I think, 2 good funding rounds, it's just the beginning by the sounds of it. To close things off, what can people expect to see and hear from you guys over the next 6-12 months? I know you've recently raised. Is it all about growth? Is it doubling down on product? Where are the focuses?
Yeah, so we are very excited to be launching larger scale programs in a number of condition areas next year. We're actually launching our first oncology program with a large sponsor, which we're very excited about. We're also launching a large program in lupus and in sickle cell disease, as well as a number of rare diseases that we're already working in that we will be standing up mosaics for, things like 𝐼GAN and PNH and C. But these, like the sickle cell and lupus and oncology programs, are all very high need areas where being able to collect really high resolution data on how people are feeling, how they're responding to therapy at home, and what flares and additional needs that they have can have a huge impact on their care. So we're really excited about that.
Sounds like a lot. You got a lot going on, which is
We do.
awesome. But thanks so much, Nell, for coming on this morning. It's really interesting. I was really looking forward to this episode. So thanks again,
Thanks,
and
Alex.
keep doing the good work. I'll make sure when we get this launched, everyone can check Folio out. There's some really interesting, life-changing work. So yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nell.